Welcome to Social Influence, Lesson 11, Minority Influence, including reference to consistency, commitment and flexibility. My name is Nick Redshaw. I have over 16 years experience of teaching A-level psychology, and I am also co-author of the highly successful Independent Learner series of student workbooks that is available exclusively on Amazon. Minority influence, including reference to consistency, commitment and flexibility. Moscovici believed that three main processes involved in minority influence. Firstly, consistency. The minority group or individual must maintain a consistent viewpoint at all times in order to influence the majority group to change their viewpoint. Next, commitment. The minority group or individual must appear confident and believe in their viewpoint in order to influence others. And finally, flexibility. The minority group or individual must show that they are prepared to accept small changes so as not to appear too rigid in their viewpoint. In order to research this, in 1969, Moscovici conducted an investigation into the processes involved in minority influence. Moscovici's research. Moscovici et al. 1969, Study of Minority Influence. The aim. To look at how a minority within a group can influence the majority. The procedures. A lab experiment. 192 female participants, all pre-checked to make sure that they did not suffer from any colour blindness, and randomly allocated to one of three conditions: consistent, inconsistent, or the control group. Each condition consisted of 6 participants, 4 genuine participants, the majority, and 2 confederates, the minority. Participants were asked to describe the colour of 36 slides, all of which were blue but varied in brightness due to different filters. In the consistent group, the 2 confederates described the colour of all 36 slides as green, not blue. In the inconsistent group, the 2 confederates described 24 of the slides as green and 12 as blue. There were no confederates in the control group. The results. As you can see from the bar chart, in the consistent group, 8% of the majority agreed with the confederate that the slides were green, not blue. In the inconsistent group, 1.25% of the majority agreed with the confederate's answers. 1/3, 32% of all participants agreed with the confederates at least on one occasion. Conclusions. So, from the above graph, and this is a question for you, what conclusions can you draw from the results from the graph above about social influence in Moscovici's research? You may want to pause the video at this point in order to answer this question. So welcome back. So the question was, what conclusions can you draw from the results of the graph above about social influence in Moscovici's research? Now, although there's no marks in the workbook for this, conclusion questions come up in the exams all the time. So a possible suggestion here for 2 marks, simply the graph in Moscovici's research shows that minority influence, or shows that the minority can influence the majority and make them conform. However, to do so, consistency is very important. So 2 salient points there. Moscovici's research shows that minority can influence the majority, and consistency is very important for the 2 marks. So now in your workbook, if you're using our workbook, or if your teacher has downloaded our workbook from TESS, complete the following tasks. If not, on lined paper, complete the following tasks. Explain the type and explanation of social influence shown by the participants in the research. And again, you may want to pause the video at this point. Okay, so for 4 marks, you need to be able to explain the type and explanation of social influence. So, 2 marks for naming the type and explanation of social influence, shown by the participants in Moscovich's research. So for example, simply internalization is the type of conformity as the presence of the minority influence amongst the majority leads to a change in public behaviour, as well as the minds of the majority. The most likely explanation is informational social influence, as the consistent individual seems to possess better knowledge in situations where it might be ambiguous, i.e. in the blue and green slide situation. The reason for this is that people like to be right, so will look to others for the information. So obviously 1 mark for naming it, the 2nd mark for explaining it. Type and then explanation. Okay then, so the next question, the minority group or individual must appear confident in their viewpoint. Choose the most appropriate process of minority influence that this example describes. Is it consistency or commitment? Okay, hopefully there you've chosen commitment. And as in the previous lessons, when it comes to evaluation, you may be asked to write a 12 or 16 mark essay on Moscovich's research or research into minority influence. For 6 marks of evaluation, you'll need to be able to highlight the strengths and limitations of this research. The strengths. It is a lab experiment, so it can be easily replicated and cause and effect can be determined. A meta-analysis by Wood et al. 1994 supports the conclusions that consistency is a major factor in minority influence. Further research by Martin et al. 2003 found that minority influence leads to a change in public behaviour and private beliefs, i.e. internalization. The findings show the importance of consistency in social influence. It goes some way to explaining why minority groups such as Friends of the Earth and the BNP have gained support by consistently delivering messages that defend their position. The limitations of the research. The experiment uses confederates, so there is deception and informed consent cannot be given. It also lacks mundane realism. The lab environment and the task involved is not an everyday one, so the results cannot be generalized to all situations of minority influence in real life. Only female participants were used, so it is gender biased, and the conclusions may not apply to male participants. Research in support of commitment carried out by Nemeth and Wachter in 1974 recreated a jury environment and found that when an individual was able to choose their own seat, as opposed to being seated by the experimenter, they were seen to be more confident by the others within the group. Furthermore, if they chose to sit at the head of the table, this increased their influence on the group, as they were perceived as having more commitment to the debate. So your final question, explain the implications of Nemeth and Wachter's 1974 research on the criminal justice system. And this is worth 2 marks, and you may want to pause the video at this point in order to answer your question. Okay, so welcome back, and explain the implications of Nemeth and Wachter's 1974 research on the criminal justice system. Marks here, 2 marks for AO2/AO3. 2 marks for a clear explanation. Nemeth's findings have serious repercussions for the criminal justice system, as it suggests that a minority can influence the majority simply by the position they sit at the table. However, Nemeth and Wachter 1974 suggested that the effects of the minority group on the majority may be somewhat diminished in a jury room environment due to the limited time for which a unanimous verdict must be reached. So moving on. Research in support of flexibility was carried out by Nemeth in 1986 in an experiment based on a mock jury looking at compensation given to the victim of a ski lift accident, found that when the Confederates in the group were rigid, in his view, about offering a low amount, the majority disagreed. However, when the Confederates were flexible and moved, in their viewpoint, a little closer to that of the majority, they were willing to compromise and be influenced to change their view. So finally, it is clear from this research that in order to influence the individual and the majority, the advice and guidance of the minority needs to be consistent and flexible. This is a powerful source of social influence, as the change is both public behaviour and private opinion are long-lasting, i.e. internalisation of the minority. This has clear implications for governments and organisations, as well as individuals who are hoping to influence the majority and bring about social change. So from the diagram, minority influence creates doubt in the minds of the majority. Highly visible public campaigns promote an alternative point of view, confidently promote their ideas and views, convince others that conflict can be avoided if they join the majority, are consistent in their views but are willing to be flexible and accept small changes. And that brings us to the end of Lesson 11.